Wow. I think the first thing I have to say is that the first people that don't want there to be any power cuts are, of course, the people at the GA who have to deal with fixing the problem when it arises. There are many, many different reasons as to why we have power cuts. I answered a question recently in Parliament where I explained every single power cut that we'd had this year, last year and the year before, and gave the reasons for them. Some are generation. There's a problem with the power station. There are very, very few of those. The one on Friday, the one on Saturday, were nothing to do with power generation. So the power station that we had did what it had to do, but the switchgear through which it ran had the problem, and consequently we couldn't distribute the power that we were generating. Some of them are caused, like yesterday's, by a contractor drilling a hole in works which they were aware of where the cabling of Gibelec is, because they're told when they get site clearance, and they drill all the same, and they cut the cable, and then the whole cable has got to be replaced. It takes time. Last night, the men were there till 2 in the morning when they finished the works. I went to see them at 10 o'clock. The work they do is incredible, and I think Gib should be thanking them for the work they do, because they deserve a big thanks. These guys started work yesterday at 2:30 when the power cut struck, and they were there at 2 in the morning fixing it so that that part of Gib could have power. The remainder of Gib got power back much earlier, and there was only a small segment of it that was actually affected. So there are many, many different reasons. It could be the grid, it could be the distribution, it could be the generation, and it could be third-party interference. We've had all of those. And we've also had a brand new power station, which does normally have teething problems. And so all these things put into one, I hope we will get better at dealing with them. We have some good plans for the medium term in terms of having an interface between the power that we have and the consumer. And so we're very actively working with the board of the GA and the GEA to hope to mitigate and reduce those more and more.
So far this year, according to Gibelec's Twitter page, there have been 30 power outages. Now, some of those are in smaller areas, others more widespread. That averages on 3 a month. Would you say that's an acceptable figure?
I think the numbers you've quoted are a load of nonsense. I gave an answer in Parliament to the Leader of the Opposition, where I took him through every single power failure this year, which itemised where and what for. But look, if you have a power cut in a one block because there's a worker downstairs that does something wrong and cuts a cable, what's that got to do with the GA? The GA are trying to repair failures that are within their own control, outside of their control, and the most important thing you have to remember, the power cut that we had on Friday was an 11,000 kV high voltage cable. These guys that are working there are working in a very, very, very dangerous environment. Safety is absolutely paramount. So they have to identify the problem, deal with the problem, but putting safety first every time. That means it takes a little bit longer. So on Friday, I think we were out for an hour and a half. There are some power cuts that could take place for 2 minutes or 5 minutes. You can't seriously be asking me a question comparing the outage of Friday with a 2-minute cut in a particular area because of third-party interference. That's not a fair assumption to make. I think people need to recognise what we're doing, what the GA are doing to try to secure the power for us on a consistent and reliable basis. But you've got to treat it fairly. I don't think it's fair on the GA or anybody else to suggest that a 2-minute cut in a particular zone, which is perfectly normal and acceptable, is the same as a 1.5 hour outage.
Okay, Minister.
Talk about how many full blackouts
Minister, let me just take you up on some of these points now. First of all, the number 30 that I counted is from Gibelec's actual Twitter page. They have tweeted on 30 days that there have been power outages. Second of all, interference by a contractor. Well, the public might wonder, how is it that the contractor doesn't know that a cable is there, and why does that keep on happening? Thirdly, a 2-minute power cut in one place. Yesterday, for example, we saw a 14-hour power cut up at Europa. People left without food, so it is significant to some people.
Yes, but hang on a second. This is not legitimate. This is not fair on the GA. You've got a contractor that got site clearance in 2019 to do the works, and in that site clearance, he's told exactly where the Gibelec cables are. If they would have done their job properly and not interfered in the cables that they knew were there, we wouldn't have had a 1-minute power cut, let alone a 13-hour in a very small sector of GIB, because GEA had reworked the distribution to only limit the disruption to that one single area. The contractor was wrong, and the contractor will be paying compensation. But as I mentioned in the press release that was issued yesterday, we are now looking at changing the law to actually enable us to get compensation, penalty, on firms, on contractors that, despite knowing where these cables are, pierce the cables in doing works for whatever reason. So when you look at all of these things, look, if there's a fault in Gibelec, put our hands up, it was a fault, and we're doing our best to deal with it. But please remember this, we don't have power cuts because Gibelec wants us to have power cuts. Gibelec doesn't want any power cuts. So to suggest that there is this blame on GA, for me, is just so unfair.
Who's responsible for all these power cuts then?
Well, I've just explained to you. Some are caused by a very old, decrepit grid, which we are replacing. We've got over 100 substations, some of which are very old, which we are replacing over a period of time. You've got third-party interference, like building contractors who drill through a cable. That happens a lot, unfortunately. And then you've got generation of power and the switch. How many are caused by failure of generation of power? Very, very few. So how many are caused by the power station? Very, very few.
Why has the Chief Minister, why did the Chief Minister himself tweet that he was seeking answers from Gibelec? Is there going to be an investigation? Will the results of an investigation be made public?
There is not going to be an investigation. The Chief Minister tweeted that he is asking questions to Gibelec as to why we are having such a heavy blackout as opposed to a segment of Gib, when we've invested the money that we have, when we bought the equipment that we were told was the best equipment to buy, why do we keep getting these power cuts? It was a perfectly legitimate question to ask. And at the same time as he did that tweet, in our WhatsApp group with Gibelec, with the Chief Minister, myself, and the senior manager of Gibelec, we were asking that precise question. What has happened? How long is it going to happen for? Why are these things happening? That's what he tweeted. Nothing wrong with that. I think it's absolutely legitimate.
And the public obviously want the answers to those questions.
Yes, of course they do. And they will have them. And they've had them in a full statement by Gibelec explaining precisely what happened with the switchgear. The first time we've had a problem since we started in this new power station with the switchgear, the distribution network. But look, these things happen. And I think, for me, the test of people has always been not when it happens, but how you respond to them. And I think the way that Gibelec have responded to all of these issues safely, never had an accident in respect of any of these number of power cuts that we've had, but they've all been repaired, power's been restored in a very short period of time. I think we should be saying thank you. I honestly, genuinely do.
So when can we expect to see fewer power cuts?
My gosh, I wish I could say that was today or tomorrow. We are working extremely hard. They are working extremely hard to minimize and mitigate so we don't have any power cuts at all. As I said before, nobody in GA wants power cuts.
The government says it's considering a warranty claim for Friday's outage. But what about the public, those who lost food, for example? The outage in the South District or in Europa Point last night was up to 14 hours. People's businesses have been affected by the power outages. Will the public be compensated for these power cuts?
No, there's no question of that. I'm not even going to be try and be polite about it. Absolutely not. We are putting forward a claim, as we do every time there's third-party interference in respect to the plant. So the contractor will expect to receive a bill for all the costs that we've encountered in dealing with the damage that they caused us in having to do all the works that we did last night until 2 o'clock in the morning. With respect to Friday, we are looking at the cause of that damage to the distribution network, and we believe that it was through faulty workmanship. And so what we are doing is advising the firm that we've found that this was caused by faulty workmanship, and consequently we will be submitting a claim in that respect. What we are also doing is we are going to be looking at doing a review of what we have and what we need to do in the short, medium and long term to take further steps to mitigate these sorts of instances. And one of the things I don't mind sharing you that we're looking at is the possibility of a battery, a big UPS system, which will give us coverage when we have a short-term failure that can be fixed by the GEA senior team redistributing the power through other means. So we're looking at all the options. There's something that's also been going on, which the GA have been doing for some years now, which is providing rings to our network. In other words, if you've got a very long cable from here to Europa Point and there's a cut traditionally it would affect everybody, and everybody on that route is out. For some years now, they've been building these rings which attack the problem from both sides. So if one approach is cut, you carry on going through the other way so we can limit the damage caused by the cut and localize it. What happened last Friday with the failure of the distribution network was that actually the equipment that we had in the plant worked. It isolated the problem, it cut everything off around it, and it protected everything else. Otherwise, if we wouldn't have had those systems in place, we could have had a huge amount of damage caused to the equipment in the plant, which thankfully we didn't. So the bits of kit that we've got within the plant are working and doing what they're meant to be doing. When there's a fault like the one we had on Friday or the one yesterday, we just need to work with them.
Lastly, a Gibelec employee was suspended for comments made on social media. He was later reinstated, but it does raise questions of freedom of speech. Shouldn't a government employee be able to criticise the government if they feel that they need to?
Forgive me for using the same word twice in one interview, but that freedom of speech in terms of an employee working within a department is a load of nonsense. If you go back to the AACR days, a person working within a government department or authority wasn't allowed to make any comment publicly on anything. What we did is change it to only your department. So I met the individual yesterday and I said to him, look, if you've got a complaint to make about anything within the power station or its infrastructure, write to me. Come and talk to me with pleasure. But what you can't do is talk about your department publicly. There's nothing to do with freedom of speech. Of course everyone has freedom of speech, but that's not freedom of speech. That's breach of the Official Secrets Act in some respects, or in breach of its terms and conditions of employment. We can't have that. So what we've done is try to enable people to do whatever they want, but outside their own departments. It is totally wrong for somebody working in the income tax office, for example, making a comment about something that they're working with publicly. The gentleman understood it. I had a very good conversation with him. He accepted it. We've agreed to move on. He accepted he was wrong, and I'm very happy that we move on. And he's now reinstated and working again. So, no issue.